and welcome to this week's ARC story. For the last 5 weeks, we have been looking at stories of 5 kings of Judah from the Bible. And this morning, we're finishing with our 5th and final one, and his name is Josiah. Josiah became king when he was only 8 years of age. There was lots of people advising him at that stage, and then at 16, he had some important decisions to make. The Bible tells us that he began at that stage to seek God. This was really a bit of a surprise, as his father, who had been king before him, had worshipped idols. But God was working in Josiah's heart. We know lots about God today because we have his very special book, the Bible, and it's full of all of the stories about what God has done for us and what he did for his people, the Israelites, in the Old Testament. But in Josiah's time, the Bible didn't look like this. In fact, they didn't have a book at all that they could go to and learn about God. But he did know that God wanted him to obey. Josiah trusted God, and 2 Chronicles chapter 34 verse 2 tells us Josiah did what was right in the sight of the Lord. So, whenever he started to obey what God was saying, the first thing he did was to get rid of all of the idols in the country. They all had to go. After Josiah ordered all of the idols to go, the next thing he ordered was for the temple to be repaired. And the temple was the special place the Israelites went to worship God. So all of the workers were working very hard repairing the temple, and the high priest Hilkiah, who would have been in charge of the temple, made a discovery. He found a very, very old scroll, a bit like this, in the dusty corner of the temple. Hilkiah was very excited. This was a very special thing that he had found. And he went to his secretary Shaphan and he told Shaphan, "I have found the book of the law of God in the temple." You see, this now was all they had. This was where the law of God was written down. They didn't have a Bible like this with the law written in it. It was all on a scroll written 800 years ago by Moses. Shaphan knew it was God's law. He had never seen a copy or held it in his hands before, and he was so excited. And both Hilkiah and Shaphan thought the king must know about this amazing discovery. He went straight to the king, opened the scroll, and he started to read God's laws. So on the scroll were the first 5 books of the Old Testament, and those are known as the law. They teach us about God's law, and they also teach how he will punish us if we don't obey him. They tell us how we should live for God. Josiah had never heard God's laws before, and he was so distressed as he listened to the reading, because he realised that he and the people were not obeying God. They weren't living as they should. In fact, the Bible tells us he was so upset that he wept and tore his robes. Josiah wanted to know more about this and how, as a nation, they could live for God. So he asked Hilkiah and 4 other men to go to speak to a lady called Huldah. She was a prophetess, which just means that she was God's spokeswoman. So she would pass on messages from God so that the people would know what God wanted them to hear. Huldah told the men that God was going to punish Israel and Judah because they had been worshipping idols, but that because Josiah was truly sorry, the punishment wouldn't come during his reign. So the men brought this message back to Josiah. So there was part of it that was good, that it wasn't going to be a punishment during Josiah's time, but the part of it that was bad was that there was going to be a punishment at some stage. After Josiah heard the message from God, he called together a huge gathering of people in Jerusalem, and he read from the scroll, as the people had never heard God's law either. Josiah then made a promise that he would follow God and keep his commands with all his heart. God's word had made a difference in Josiah's life. Hearing God's word had changed Josiah's actions. When we belong to God, the Bible should make a difference in our hearts and lives as well. Josiah made the people promise to serve God, but sadly, they didn't mean it. And after Josiah's death, they were captured and taken away as slaves, just as God had told Huldah in that message that the punishment would happen. King Josiah had gotten rid of all the idols in the land. He'd started to fix the temple, and he also started to celebrate Passover again. This was a special time that remembered how God had rescued their ancestors from Egypt. The people remembered how they had been saved from a visit by the angel of death because the blood of a lamb had been sprinkled on the doorposts. Boys and girls, that is described as the Passover lamb, and Jesus is our Passover lamb. He gave his blood on the cross to save us, and just like the blood of the Passover lamb saved the Israelite people, Jesus and what he did in his death is what saves us. Josiah may have trusted in God, but he still made mistakes. He went to war against the king of Egypt when he hadn't asked God if he should. He disguised himself as an ordinary soldier, and during the battle was struck by an arrow. Josiah died, and the people were heartbroken as he'd been a good king and he'd lived by God's word. If you love God, ask for his help to be a doer of the word and not just a hearer, as it says in the Bible. God worked in Josiah's heart, and he changed Josiah, and Josiah lived for God. He can work in your heart too, boys and girls, if you ask him to, and you can then do what God's word asks you to do. Now, today our activity is a maze. So you'll remember from the story that there was a scroll found in the temple. So the maze is to help King Josiah find his way to the scroll.